Ambassador John Bolton, thanks for joining the Dispatch podcast.
Glad to be with you.
Well, this is something that you've been arguing for many years, and we are now about 36 hours after the attacks on the 3 nuclear sites by U.S. B-2 bombers. Your reaction to those attacks in this moment?
Well, I think it was the right thing for Trump to do. I think it would have been preferable to have a joint operation with the Israelis from the beginning, but better late than never. I think it's a mistake to think that this is a one-and-done kind of operation. I do think the Iranians will respond. I think it'll be a very foolish thing for them to do, but I think that's the position that they're in. And, there's still a lot of cleanup work to do in terms of the Iranian nuclear weapons program. The Israelis can do some of it, but I think we're going to have to still be involved. But what's been done so far, using the standard of the International Atomic Energy Agency's Director General, who's commented both on Natanz and on Fordo, very significant damage.
Do you think the administration understands, based on your knowledge of the players involved and what we've seen in their comments since these attacks, that there is this additional work to be done?
Well, I think the military clearly understands it. I can just tell you from my own discussions with them when I was in government that they have thought through all of the implications of these various nuclear weapons programs by the rogue states, and they know, and people at the Department of Energy and elsewhere know exactly how the nuclear fuel cycle works, exactly how nuclear weapons are constructed. We've been doing it for a long time. We know all the ins and outs of it, and a few strikes, even at critical facilities, are necessary to destroy the program, but not sufficient. And they would have plans and capabilities to follow up if the president ordered them to do so.
Yeah, if you follow the administration's rhetoric since the strikes, there were early comments that this was not about regime change, was not going to be about regime change from Vice President Vance on the Sunday shows. And then Sunday afternoon, President Trump said, in effect, hey, why not regime change? MIGA, make Iran great again. You had a tweet early yesterday morning saying this is a great first step, but this really should be about regime change. Why isn't what we've done, even if you include the cleanup work that you're talking about doing with respect to the nuclear program, why isn't that enough? Why regime change?
Because this is about the regime itself, its support for terrorism, as well as its efforts to develop deliverable nuclear weapons are part of the mission they see for themselves in the Middle East and around the world. And until the regime itself is gone, there is no foundation for lasting peace and security in the Middle East. They're not the only cause of disturbance, but they're the principal cause, both through the nuclear program and the support for terrorism. They have been negotiating for 25 or 30 years on this. People keep saying, well, let's have more negotiation. How many times do you have to do the same thing before you realize they're using negotiations for their own purposes? The central point here is time is not value-free. Time is important, and it is always on the side of the proliferator, to give them more time to solve the very difficult problems of getting a nuclear program functioning, and in the particular case we're facing now, to hide, conceal, move, further harden all of their nuclear assets to minimize the damage that the U.S. and Israel are trying to do to them.
And I think you could make the argument sort of on top of what you're saying, that there's never been a more suitable moment for this kind of a campaign. I mean, you've got their proxies who are either eliminated or largely eliminated, not as effective as they once were. There's not much presence in Syria. I mean, all sorts of regional arguments that would say sort of now's the moment if you're going to do it.
Well, exactly, because they're all connected. If Hamas or the people it's trying to intimidate know that Big Daddy in Tehran is in severe trouble itself, they're going to say, maybe I'd rather go to graduate school and study 18th century English poetry than become a terrorist. I mean, this is the kind of thing that has ripple effects all around what the Iranians called the axis of resistance, or what they tried to implement through the Ring of Fire strategy, again, their term that Hamas began on October the 7th. So that's why, to come back to the more fundamental question, regime change really has to be the objective. And the fact of the Israeli attacks, the fact of our attacks on the nuclear program, I think do have a destabilizing effect on the regime, whether that's their principal motive or not. The Iranians have to acknowledge, after October 7, where they've only had one military opponent, that they're getting hammered. I mean, they're not doing well in this war that they started.
Right.
Do they really now want to come after American military or civilian positions in the Middle East? Do they really want to think about closing the Strait of Hormuz? Do they want a second military adversary, particularly when it would be the greatest military power in the world? Is that really what they want to do in Tehran? I think divisions among the top generals, the top ayatollahs over that question do have a destabilizing effect. Let's fragment the regime at the top, make it easier if and when the people come out into the streets to bring the regime down. Just as the Egyptian military didn't fire on the demonstrators, they wouldn't fire on their own people when the Mubarak regime fell, we should be looking for that kind of thing here, too.
Yeah, the answer to your question, I think, if you're looking at the supreme leader, Ayatollah Khamenei, is yes, he would just as soon continue to have these provocations. He would continue to stand up to the United States. He's incredibly stubborn. We've seen that over his entire tenure. What's your sense of the divisions that do exist now? I mean, are there real divisions? Is he the one who's still making all these calls?
Well, the ideology at the top of the Islamic Revolution remains. In fact, there was a Financial Times article several months ago now that said the younger generation of Ayatollahs may be worse. But if you look at the military leaders, including some in the Revolutionary Guard, they can see the country's in real disarray. And in terms of popular opinion, going back to the economic riots of 2018 and 2019, there's still enormous economic dissatisfaction countrywide, not just in Tehran, where the few Western journalists like to congregate, out in the whole rest of the country with its over 90 million population. The young people, 60% of the country is under 30. They know they could have a different life than what the Ayatollahs prescribed for them. They can see it across the Gulf in Dubai and Abu Dhabi and Doha. The ethnic groups, the Kurds, Azeris, Baluchis, Arabs, they don't like the Persian majority. And since the Mahsa Amini murder now 2 years ago, when the women basically said to the Ayatollahs, you do not speak the word of God when it comes to the dress code, that challenged the very legitimacy of the regime. It wasn't about the hijab, it was about what the claim of the Ayatollahs was to be the only authentic voice of God. Once that legitimacy goes, the regime's in trouble. But the opposition is, while it may be nationwide, doesn't have a strong leadership at this point. It doesn't communicate very well amongst itself. These are all things we could help them with. This has nothing to do with boots on the ground. But the opposition is there, and if the top leadership in the regime fragments, that's when the regime could come down.
You mentioned boots on the ground. There seems to be very little appetite for that among the American populace. And anytime you're talking about regime change, there it seems to me is a certain obligation on behalf of the United States, if we help produce a regime change, to make sure that what follows isn't chaos. This was one of the arguments about the U.S. role in post-war Iraq. What do you see as our obligation? What do you see is in our national interest to make sure that it's not just a disaster? And doesn't that mean committing, whether it's boots on the ground, the United States to a bigger role in the Middle East than it seems like President Trump has in mind at the moment?
No, I don't think so. In fact, I think I'm not questioning the good faith or energy or ability or effort of any of the Americans who tried to make the Coalition Provisional Authority in Iraq work after the Second Gulf War. But I think the effort was misguided. I think my own view is we won the Second Gulf War handily. And people then tend to lump that in. And we overthrew Saddam Hussein, which was important for the United States. People tend to forget about the success, and they look at the failed nation-building effort. I do think we have some obligations, but I think the Iranian people are sophisticated, they're well-educated. Many of them still remember the rule of the Shah when they lived in a very pro-Western country. And what I had suggested going back to after Saddam in Iraq was not set up a government that we would then run. You don't enhance political maturation in a country by making decisions for the people. You enhance political maturation by letting them make decisions, including making mistaken decisions from which they learn. So what I said in the case of Iraq was basically give them a copy of the Federalist Papers, say you might find some helpful things in there, and then let them work it out. That's how you nation build, put the responsibility on the people. Maybe hold the ring from the outside, but don't try and do it for them.
One last question in the time that we've got left. You know, I look at this. I've been, I think, where you are on the question of the threat, the potential threat from Iran's nuclear program. Certainly, the Obama years saw almost an avoidance of any discussion of the nature of the regime itself, which I thought was a colossal mistake. The decoupling process that the Obama administration undertook in its diplomacy to Iran. But I look at Donald Trump, and obviously you've been a critic of his. You've written critically of him. You worked closely with him. And I think, as sort of relieved as I am that we seem to have made some progress on the nuclear program, I'm not comforted by the way that Donald Trump makes decisions in general, by his character as a leader and a statesman, and even the reporting that we're getting, including some conversations I've had myself about what led him to want to be involved here, what led him to do these strikes was basically he was in effect jealous of the attention that the Israelis were getting. And he said, I want some of that attention. And so we went and bombed Iran's nuclear sites. How comforted can we feel with Donald Trump in charge, even if he made a policy decision that, you know, accords with the things that you and I have believed for quite some time?
Well, I said in my book, working in his administration was like living inside a pinball machine, and that's about the way this decision to attack Iran played out. He wanted to be at the head of the parade, just didn't know which parade was going to be the successful parade. He's never a loser, you know, he's always a winner, and he was undecided. Now he tweets about the possibility of regime change. I mean, this is, but it's something to take advantage of. When he moves in this direction, we should encourage him. But it's a reflection. He has no philosophy. He has no national security strategy. He doesn't even do policy as we conventionally understand it. It was like that in the first term. It is like that in the second term.
Yeah. Well, feeling both relieved and deeply concerned at the same time, I think, is the way to think about it at the moment. Ambassador John Bolton, thank you for your time this morning.
Well, thanks so much for having me.